Defence Secretary. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today evening, and thanks to Mr. Madhu for giving me a perch on his windows. Congratulations on the launch of the Windows to the World. Of course, I had spoken here 2 years ago, and that subject was about my experiences in the Indian Foreign Service. Insofar as Brexit is concerned, this is one of the rare phenomena which doesn't visit the headlines that often. It's as good a story as provides a diplomat to file his report, concern to those who feel affected, and confusion to the common man. I think the underlying word which has followed Brexit, in Britain particularly, if you look at all the media, is confusion, uncertainty. So as the economists call the U word. U would be universal in this case because the uncertainty and confusion prevail all over the world. Now, the spirit of Brexit, if I were to start, was captured exceptionally well in one of the episodes of Yes Minister. Who is not aware of Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister? And I'll read a small excerpt from that, where you have Sir Humphrey Appleby, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry, telling his Minister James Hacker, he says, Britain has had the same foreign policy objective for the last 500 years, to create a disunited Europe, where the Italians fight the Germans fight the French fight the Luxembourgians, and so on. Divide and rule, you see. So divide and imperia has been the British hallmark all along, right in India also. We had to break the whole thing up, so we had to get inside. We tried to break it up from outside, but that wouldn't work. Now that we are inside, we can make a complete pig's breakfast of the whole thing. And that's what, I don't know whether it happened or not. In fact, it's also very interesting when you talk about Britain. This is what a British diplomat once told me, that they used to say the sun never set on the British Empire. The reason he said was, God never trusted the Brits in the dark. So obviously, I think the sun never set in the British Empire. So yeah, look at my watch also. The move towards the European Union, as we know today, started in 1951 as a riposte to the, you could say, a sort of combat fatigue which had occupied Europe after years or centuries of war and combat. And in 1951, they formed the European Steel and Economic Coal Community with 6 countries: Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This became the European Economic Community, or the Common Market, in 1957. And as we know, progressively down, this became the European Union in 1999. This union today has or had, has would be more relevant because it will still not add 28 members. It will become 27 when the negotiations start. The United Kingdom, of course, entered the European Union then it was called the European Economic Community in 1973 through a parliamentary dispensation. And thereafter, in 1975, the Harold Wilson government, Labour government, had a referendum with a question then which was, do you think the United Kingdom should stay in the European community or the common market? Reminds you of what happened on June 23rd. 67.23% of those in the UK voted to stay here. And what was very interesting was, Mrs. Thatcher, who was in the opposition then, supported the stay. Of course, thereafter there were much water flowed under the Thames. Problems arose between the UK and the EU after the adoption of the Single European Act, which led to the single market in 1986, conformed in 1993. And thereafter, you had the Treaty of Maastricht and the Treaty of Amsterdam, which led to the common foreign and defense policy. And therein lies the very genesis of the problem between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as they call it, United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the European Union. And they felt that with this common foreign and defense policy, the sovereignty of the United Kingdom was being affected, the common problems of economic and trade policies were being affected, and the say of Europe, the say of Britain in formulating its own policy was being undermined by the so-called administrators in Brussels. And I think Mrs. Thatcher, who had supported the referendum in 1975, became an avid critic, one of the Eurosceptics. And I think at that point in time, it was very interesting that Mrs. Thatcher was trying to see how best to take Britain away or undermine the European Union's power vis-à-vis Britain was concerned. Of course, I was in London when all these confabulations took place to throw out Mrs. Thatcher, I'm using the word throw out, by these so-called Europhiles, led by Michael Hasselton and others. I don't know whether any of you have seen this excellent movie acted by Meryl Streep called Iron Lady, which has Mrs. Thatcher. And interestingly, it was shown just 2 days ago in one of the channels. And it was very interesting. And I think Mrs. Thatcher lost her premiership in 1990 to a relatively unknown Europhile, John Major, if you all recall. And successive UK governments thereafter ensured that the British government did not join the Schengen Agreement of 1995 and the Euro or in 2000. Interestingly, while the Tories were strongly in a group anti-Euro, the Labour and the Liberal Democratic parties were seen as staunch Europhiles. Now, David Cameron, when he won the elections in 2010, had to form a coalition government because he did not get a majority. He went with the Liberal Democrats, if you all recall, with Nick Clegg as the Deputy Prime Minister. And this emboldened Eurosceptics to pressurize David Cameron to incorporate the need for an in-out referendum before the end of 2017 in the European Election Manifesto of 2014 and the General Election Manifesto of 2015. Of course, people would ask what were the issues which were confronting the British minds then. The main issues were the subject of sovereignty, which I mentioned earlier. The feeling was that most of the European laws were imposed on the British. Border control was a major problem, even though Britain was not a part of the Schengen arrangement. Control of justice and home affairs, migration-related issues. This was one of the major issues which confronted the British people in the recent referendum. Contribution to the budget. In fact, they said that Britain contributes around £350 million every week to the European Union and gets only pence in return. Trade and economic issues and agriculture. They felt that the common agricultural policy was undermining the British agricultural produce, the farmers. And Britain still is a nation of shopkeepers and farmers. As we all know, Cameron called for the referendum on the 23rd of June this year with a single question. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European community, should a member of the European Union, or leave the European Union? He, of course, was supremely confident that the Remainers will carry the day. And that is why, very interestingly, when you're having such a loaded subject for a referendum, you would have at least prepared for the options, if the option was to stay or to leave. There was no white paper, there was no debate on what will happen. And the Prime Minister, being supremely confident, thought that the others will not be able to overcome the strength of the British government. And that was a major downfall. Of course, he also had worked out a package of concessions in February of this year, prior to the referendum. He, of course, thought that by his Remain message, he would be able to send a message to the Eurosceptics who were a bit of a nuisance to him on the backbench, and also put Labour Party on notice. Of course, there have been many referendums in Europe, but only one referendum on leave, which Greenland in 1982. Greenland is a part of Denmark. It had differences on fisheries policy, and the referendum carried that day. The referendum, of course, was carried by turnout was 72.2%, and 51.9% of the population of the United Kingdom voted for leave, which was a major shock. If you all recall, on the 22nd night also, the opinion polls were predicting that the Remain will carry the day. And I think those who saw it as the votes were being counted, one of them was me from 6 o'clock that morning, same one. You saw that it was a seesaw, and finally, when it was a couple of thousand year, a couple of 100,000 year, finally a couple of millions carried the day for the leavers. What are the major reasons for the levers to carry the day? Inequities, differences between the poor and the rich, a major problem because of the budget cuts. Pensioners felt that those who were pensioned off were not getting the due. Project Fear, which was heavily campaigned by the levers. And of course, the question of migration, because most of the Brits thought that the Lithuanians, as they call it, the Poles and the Lithuanians, were taking away their jobs. And Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, as I said, was forced out of office by the European integrationists. But she has had a revenge, literally, you could say, by the pro-Europe Prime Minister being knocked off. So what did Brexit do? It left the world, Britain and Big Bro, shaken and stirred. The James Bond thing is shaken but not stirred. But here it was shaken and stirred. And David Cameron had to resign. Theresa May came on as Prime Minister. And interestingly, Theresa May was one of those who was a Remainer. And disharmony in the UK has arisen, mistrust between Scotland and Ireland, Northern Ireland. And the prime negotiating positions in the new British government has been given to the levers. Boris Johnson, who was the leader, who lost out also, is the Foreign Secretary. Of course, Boris Johnson is known for his maverick ideas. He was a journalist. His wife has some Indian blood in her. And he is famous for his record of giving names to most of the leaders of the world. David Davis, another lever, is the minister to negotiate the Brexit. Andrea Leadsom, who was one of the contenders for the Labour Party leadership, is the Minister for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, who will have to negotiate the agricultural policy. Liam Fox, another contender for the British Prime Ministership, is the Minister for International Trade. Any success in the negotiations would naturally be that of Prime Minister Theresa May. But if it falls short of the expectations, which is what it will do, the burden of the cross will have to be borne by the levers, that is Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, David Davis and Andrea Leadsom. One important portfolio has been given to one of the Remainers, Amber Rudd, who will oversee the migration part. Now, where does Britain go? It will have to invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty for formal negotiations. They don't have a negotiating paper. They will have to look at the various options. Will it be this Norwegian option, which means they will have to contribute to the single market and also contribute to the four ideas: goods, services, money and trade. Now, migration and people. Now, that is going to be a tricky issue because one of the major reasons for Britain leaving the EU was migration. So will they do it? On migration, there was a very interesting, again, like Yes Minister. You would have all seen this spoof on Bertie Wooster and Jeeves, where Jeeves finally says his actual name is Jacobowitz, and he's also leaving Bertie Wooster because he is a Pole. So obviously, I think this has been a major problem. And now, the European Union leaders would like Britain to start the negotiations quickly so that they can get the uncertainties out. What happened after June 23? The British pound lost heavily, and first time in 30 years, it sort of fell rapidly by over 8%. Second, I think pound sterling time to a low of 1.35 to the dollar. Many banks lost their ground. Insurance companies had a major loss. Property, real estate had a major problem. Pharmaceutical companies, many of the investors have a problem. One of the most important things which Britain gave to the world, the English language, will not be a language of the European Union now, once Britain leaves, because each country in Europe gives one language as one of the languages in the European Union. And Ireland, whose language is also English, gave it as Gaelic, and Malta gave it as Maltese. So if Britain leaves, English is not going to be a language of the European Union. Very interesting point. Industry is at risk, and now what a lot of industrialists and others in England and other places are thinking of doing is shifting operations to Ireland, or to Frankfurt, or to Paris. So Britain's role as a future financial center, according to many of the observers, would be in doubt. But we'll come to that later. House builders, I said, have also suffered in the bargain. they say that recession could be a prime problem in the coming days. And what the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, he is no longer the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Chancellor of the Exchequer is the Finance Minister, he had said that if Britain leaves the European Union, the GDP in Britain could fall as much by 3.5% to 6% by 2030. It's a major thing. So I think the economy will be in a real quandary, with also the agencies, rating agencies downgrading the British investment grade from AAA plus to AA minus. I think that's what they did. So it's a major loss for Britain from that point of view. Of course, they have a new finance minister, Philip Hammond, who was a former foreign minister of Britain. They call them secretaries, foreign secretary. And he has a steady hand. And the Bank of England President Mike Carney, they worked out, hopefully, to steady the British ship, that it moves forward without any problems. I think even though the doomsdayers and the doomsayers have said that the British industry will go into recession, British pound will go in a tailspin, there's been some stabilization which has happened, and I think it is not as bad as what we would expect. But once the negotiations start, that is where the real problems will arise. What about India? When Brexit took place, before that, most of our leaders had said that for us, Britain is an important partner in Europe, because most of our entry into Europe has been through Europe, through Britain. Because you see Tata's, Chorus, most of the IT companies have a major presence in Britain through manufacturing and also through numbers. As we all know, one of the flagships, the Tata JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, is the flagship. In fact, David Cameron had said, for Remain, Sabke Saath Rahenge. I think one of the slogans was borrowed from Prime Minister Modi's own slogan. So from an Indian point of view, I think the Commerce Ministry and the Finance Ministry have said that we have all the macroeconomic indicators under control, but we'll have to negotiate a new free trade agreement with Britain. Of course, we were negotiating a broad-based trade and investment agreement with the European Union, and there were three sticking points from the European side. One was on automobiles. They say that India's automobile industry imposes 100% duty on import of automobiles. Germans were the most leaders in that. Second was wines and spirits, 150% duty. Our reservations and concerns were on the mobility, that is Mode 4 as we call, and data protection. I am sure that the information technology companies would be concerned over the developments here, because some of the industrialists have as much as a couple of thousand people working there in Britain, like Infosys, Wipro, and all have major presence in London. And secondly, Britain as a financial center is a global financial center. So that is another point of concern when we look at the Brexit fallout. Again, as I say, uncertainty is the order of the day, because no one knows where it will finally lead to. Because if the Norwegian model is adopted by Britain, which is stay in the single market, then I think the problems will be attenuated to a large extent. Because the Norwegian model allows for Norway to enjoy all the benefits of that as an EU member, but not being in the EU. Of course, they will have to have the four freedoms, as they call it: goods, services, money, and people incorporated in that. We'll have to see how much of the people factor would be brought into play. On the people factor, Indian restaurants have had a major problem when Theresa May was the Home Secretary. A lot of chefs, waiters did not get their visas to enter. So some of the curries which were in UK were found to have a different taste, even though the last supper which Cameron had was an Indian curry from an Indian tandoori next door. So Indian curry would be a major fallout if the problem continues. But for India, I think the Commerce Minister has indicated that we will work out a new free trade agreement with Britain, and if that comes, hopefully, I think we should be able to carry the day. EU, couple of words. We have a strategic partnership with the EU, and this was brought into play in 2004. And if the broad-based trade and investment agreement comes into play, we would have a large plus factor in terms of our trade and industry being able to move into Europe. And in terms of the trade indicators, today our largest trading partner globally for India is the European Union, and in the European Union, Britain only is third, Germany and Belgium are number 1 and 2. So I think, what does the Brexit bring in? Just for a couple of minutes quickly. One is globally, a lot of concern. Will Brexit lead to, as they call it, Frexit? In the America, Texit. They said Texas wanted to get out of the United States of America. That's a dream for many. I think that is not going to happen at all. But Marine Le Pen, the French leader, who could very well be the president in the next elections next year, because they say François Hollande has not done well. If she has said, if she becomes the president, she would by executive order withdraw France from the European Union and then bring it up to Parliament. The rise of right-wingers in most of the European countries is a issue. Race was a certain issue for some days, but I don't think that is a major problem now, and it is not in the news as much as we would like to see. Britain would remain very much a part of NATO, and I think they had a NATO summit in Poland just last week, and Britain was one of the major players and their contributors. Russia is very happy that Britain has exited Britain will exit the EU. And even exit is not immediate, because after invoking Article 50, the negotiations can go on for 2 years and more if a viable alternative is not found. Who benefits from this? Britain definitely will lose out a lot in the immediate run-up to for the next couple of years, if not decades, because as President Obama said, even when the Trans-Pacific Trade Initiative, TPP, is being negotiated, it is with the EU. So Britain will stand alone. It will have to negotiate another all-standalone agreement with the US also. It will lose out on many of the other perks and benefits, because if Scotland were tomorrow to have a referendum, they held a referendum in last year, if you recall, it was defeated. If there's a referendum, Scotland moves out, then you will have a little England. I think it will be going back to 1588 of Queen Elizabeth I. We don't know whether Elizabeth II will lead into Elizabeth I. Not progressive, but regressive. Possibility, but we don't know. Northern Ireland will be very keen to join the Republic of Ireland, because the open borders was an agreement of the Good Friday Agreement of 1998.
They were trying to tie up with the EU even while Britain leaves.
Scotland. Yeah, the first minister, as they call it, as Nicola Sturgeon, has had a chat with her. But France and Spain are not keen to allow Scotland to stay on in the EU, because they feel, particularly Spain, that this would lead to problems in Catalonia, and that is what they would not like to happen. And I think China is still watching, because we always have to factor in China as a bull in a China shop, as they say, or bull in the EU shop. But EU would continue to move on strength, and that's why they would like to get this Brexit issue resolved as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, so that the uncertainties are done. But I think before I exit my talk, I would say, and remain here and not leave, is there are more questions and very few answers, because once the negotiations start, that is when we will really know. One of the issues which a lot of people ask me, the final point was, what happens to the visa issue for a lot of Indians? Because Theresa May, as Home Minister or Home Secretary, had brought in a lot of milestones in terms of point system for the visas. I think if an industrialist is there, or a business person is there, or a student is there, or education is there, I think those people are not going to face any problems. We were assured by the British Consul General, the UK Consul General not long ago, that Britain would still continue to be a welcoming country. But in terms of our own industrial exposure, we may have to work on in terms of two establishments. One establishment in the UK, because we would still and would continue to see UK as an important country in our trade and business activities. At the same time, we'll have to look at EU as one more post, because what the privileges you had by staying on in the UK to get into EU may not be that easily available if Britain does not get to a Norway model or any other model. So I think till we get a final solution to it, Britain, UK still continues to be the 28th member. EU is still 28 and not yet 27. But down the line, we don't know what will happen. We'll have to keep on watching. Maybe 1 year down the line, we can have another chat. By then, we still not be resolved. We'll still say it is still uncertain. The U word will be very much on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a question. What are they negotiating? What is the negotiating point and what is the sticking point apart from the 4 points which you were saying about people, money and